Hello and welcome to Matt and Mike Pull Focus. I'm Mike.
And I'm not.
And today we're going to be talking about a relatively new release, Matt. It is the 2022 Matt Reeves film, The Batman. And we're going to be joined by Matt's brother David from the Escape Goat podcast. Welcome, David.
Hello. Really glad to be part of this unique crossover. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here to talk about this, and it's I think on your show and my show we obviously often deal with things that are a little bit older, and usually deal with things that are quite a lot older than something that's literally just come out this week. And we all saw the new film The Batman yesterday, right?
Yeah. Last night.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we went to the 5:10 screening last night at the Lowry. Had lovely reclining seats. It was a perfect cinema, so no complaints on that end.
Not at all.
Luxury. Yeah, and I saw it last night in London, actually on an IMAX as well. It was my first trip back to the IMAX since Dune last year, so that was and it actually had much better seats, so my neck's in a much better condition than it was after Dune. Because I mean, really, like the first 4 rows of the IMAX should be written off. Really, I don't think that's.
There's no point, is there? Straight.
No, I mean, we went to see Batman Begins there, didn't we, in the IMAX in Manchester, and I remember being sat kind of far to the left-hand side. And like our necks were like strained like this way, and what's her name? Tom Cruise's wife's head just being huge on the screen.
Oh, Katie Holmes.
Katie Holmes, yeah, ex-wife, right?
Yeah, ex-wife.
Yeah.
I think people have commented on this, but is it 2 of Tom Cruise's ex-wives have been in Batman movies? Because there's Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No way, that's crazy. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, weird one. Yeah, you can tell who's gonna marry from who's lined up to be in Batman movies. You know. I want to talk a little bit before we get to that. I should say, for people, the way we're going to approach this roughly, I'm not sure exactly what the timing is going to end up as, but they'll be in the show notes when we're finalised. So what we're going to do roughly is we're going to talk a little bit about our background with the Batman franchise a little bit. Then we're going to provide a shortish, spoiler-free review, or we're going to try to at least, and that will be completely spoiler-free if you haven't seen the movie yet yourself. And then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to really dive into all the plot and all the spoilers and all the kind of character stuff that's hard to mention if you're trying to do that. So we'll do that. I just wanted to mention before we talk about, as a sort of lead into talking about the franchise itself, your the very first episode of your podcast was about the Batman franchise, right? Do you want to tell us what you covered there?
Yeah, we did that. I think it's probably over 2 years ago now. We went to a screening, an anniversary screening of Batman at the Stockport Plaza together, and it was actually a double bill of Batman and Batman Returns. Batman Returns is still my favourite Batman movie by quite a long way, and it was an amazing screening. And we actually got to meet one of the stars, didn't we? It was one of the Joker's men.
Yeah, one of his henchmen.
Yeah, who features in a lot of scenes, but mainly most notably anyway, the art gallery scene, where they're defacing all the paintings. And so it was a really special screening, and that's kind of around the point we thought we've got to, we need to talk about this because it was such a special event, and that became our first episode, yeah. So it was only probably a couple of weeks after that we recorded the first episode of Matt Might Pull Focus, which was great. So yeah, it's got a really, Batman was... Yeah, you could say pretty essential to the beginnings of our podcast. So yeah, it's got good memories.
Yeah, definitely good memories, and it's definitely interesting to see how far we've kind of come from there. Like I believe we spent most of the time just like recounting the plot of Batman, and just
it's so kind of wooden now, isn't it? When you listen back to it, we loosen up about halfway through, but the beginning is like, The Batman is a film that was released in 1989.
Exactly.
I think you must have cut out most of that stuff, because I should say I actually have listened to that much more recently than you guys, because I listened to it this morning, mostly just to make sure I wasn't making you go over old stuff, needlessly again. But I think you were actually pretty fluid. I mean, you certainly rambled all over the place about it, but that's a slightly different thing. And you touched on a little bit of the little other bits of the franchise. So, but I'll put that, I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes, as I'm sure you will as well. But without making you go over too much ground again, I think it's fair to say that me and Matt's background with the Batman franchise, certainly in at all really, but in terms of media adaptations, started with the Burton movies, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. We've not done a Batman Returns episode yet, have we, Mike?
I had to check that you hadn't. No, I was actually astounded.
We haven't covered it yet. We did. I think I did it in my favourite movie intros. If anyone wants to check out that episode, when me and Mike recommend our favourite introductions to movies. But it was Batman Returns became a sort of, as much as the best horror films in the house. It was such a kind of a taboo, because I think our parents, especially our mum, didn't want us to see it because they knew knew how violent it was, compared to some other sort of kids movies franchises aimed at kids at that point, which this kind of was in a way. But yeah, I mean, everyone knows the reputation of Batman Returns, how it disgusted the sort of Happy Meal lobby, and it's got there's a whole story about that. If anyone wants to check out on YouTube, there's plenty of documentaries kind of about that. But we knew, I certainly knew at the time, that it was something really special, really dark, really violent, and kind of mean-spirited and kind of world-weary, and that's what I loved about it, because I knew it wasn't like your conventional kids movie, and it certainly wasn't like the movies that came after it, the Joel Schumacher Batmans, and I think that's probably why it remains my favourite Batman movie, because of the magic that it held as a child, of this kind of forbidden fruit of the darkness of a movie that I knew I could watch if I really wanted to, because it was available at friends' houses, but it was never available in our house to watch, so it was like the best horror movies in that way.
Yeah, Matt, I'm very surprised that we haven't spoken about it on our show yet, and I think we're going to be saving it for your birthday present. I think that would be a nice birthday present to talk about that for you.
Yeah, that would be great, man. A May episode. Yeah, let's do that, dude. That'd be awesome.
Exactly.
So, Mike, from listening to the Batman 89 episode that you guys did, I believe your familiarity with the franchise didn't start that much later, but a little bit later, right? So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd say... Again, parents would have the same kind of idea about not introducing me to Batman and Batman Returns a bit too early in my life, since I was about 4 or so when it came out. So it was Batman Forever and my absolute adoration of Jim Carrey when I was younger. Him being Ace Ventura, him being The Mask, him being up there with Robin Williams in terms of childhood heroes of mine. That was just hey, he's playing the Riddler, he's playing a Batman villain, this is going to be fantastic. And Tommy Lee Jones was a really camp kind of wacky looking kind of villain with Two-Face. So yeah, and I believe Matt said that maybe Batman Returns wasn't a good idea for a Happy Meal toy, but I'm pretty sure Batman Forever was really being promoted in McDonald's and all over TV, and there was so many promotions with it that it was very much a nice, bright, shiny, happy version compared to the Tim Burton. So I was more not encouraged, but I was more allowed to watch Forever, and it definitely made an impact. But it's weird to think that my first Batman was ever was Val Kilmer.
Yeah. No, it's fair to say he didn't make much of an impact in the role. But it's funny, we had a bit of pre-recording chat, me and Mike, just before we started recording for this episode, and I was sort of positing to you that the Schumacher Batmans are, I think for quite a long time now, have been too dismissed. I think, and I think that's not just because, as I said off mic, that they've got a very, very distinctive style of their own. For you don't have to like it, obviously, but loads of different Batman adaptations have distinctive styles. But also, you might argue with elements of this, Matt. I don't know, but I think there is quite a lot of continuity. I think more so than I would have realised as an adolescent. Quite a lot of continuity with the Burton movies. They are, and by continuity, I don't mean plot details. I don't mean the MCU. I mean the Burton movies are ridiculous as well as being. Yeah.
In a way, I think that you can't shit on him too much, Joel Schumacher, because he basically took what Burton was starting to do in Batman Returns and ran with it and made it a bit more colourful. So I do think he does get a little bit too much flack for that. I like Batman Forever. I think it's a fine movie. Batman and Robin's obviously just a bit of a joke. Doesn't really. I don't think of that as kind of discount that one. Batman Forever. I think Val Kilmer's not a bad Batman, to be honest, or Bruce Wayne. Certainly better than Clooney. But the thing I want to mention that I think is really exceptional is the score for Batman Forever by Elliot Goldenthal, because not only did he do the score for Alien 3, which is one of my favourite movies.
There it is.
That. There he is. Alien 3 bingo.
Take it off.
But I mean, how are you going to follow up Danny Elfman's score, for Batman? It's the best score ever. It's incredible, and it's it's all there, and also
it's anthemic, isn't it? Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible, and you're going to take that and run with it. And I think he did a really amazing job. Da 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 da. It's great. It's really good, and so I think that he deserves a lot of credit for that as well. And I think he has a really distinctive style of orchestration and the sounds coming out of it. Obviously, it reminds me a lot of watching Alien 3, so that's nice for me. When I watch Batman Forever, I'm like, I'm going to save space.
I suppose if the Elfman score is kind of the original Star Wars theme equivalent, then the Goldenthal score for Batman Forever is almost like the Jewel of the Fates in a way, isn't it? It's like the sort of
Yeah.
it's the most distinctive you can then get on top of the already iconic stuff, you know.
And what's the thing that everyone remembers about the Phantom Menace is that scene and that music. You know, like that's pretty much the main thing that people remember, and that and Jar Jar. But yeah,
Obviously,
that's the whole
we
thing.
don't talk about Jar Jar.
Yeah, stuff I'm saying is going to be quite influenced by a podcast that my former podcasting guests, Kit, Jack, and George recorded, I think, about a year and a half ago. About the Nolan trilogy. Various ones of them have written about it, elsewhere and talked about it elsewhere as well. But there's a specific YouTube video they recorded that I'm going to link to in this, which is a very long chat about the Nolan trilogy. So I'll recommend the audience towards that. And I think, as I say, that's just been. I think the Nolan trilogy is just one of those cultural events that's just been talked about too much now. I think that's kind of like I take their videos like the last word on it. That's enough. But I think it's sort of interesting. I think we're going to come back to it when we talk about the Batman, actually, because I think, and actually, you know what? I was thinking, listen to you guys talk about Batman 89. I think we might come back to Batman 89 more than I thought, right? Because I suppose the obvious parallels for the Batman, and we'll get more into this, obviously, are 89 and Batman Begins, because they're both trying to reboot it, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
89, you could argue, is trying to reboot it from the 60s show, I suppose.
And the initial Batman themes in this, as in the Bruce Wayne Batman struggles and things he's dealing with, it's not being known by the public like he is in later movies. It's that thing of how do I penetrate into the culture in a sort of in a productive way or whatever, that you can't figure out. That's kind of one of the major arcs of this film, which I think I appreciate a lot more now, having had a day to think about it, because these are some of the problems that I had with it. But now I think about it, I do think it had a better arc than I initially thought it did. And Batman Begins, obviously, with him just getting his gear together, how he's going to actually be Batman, which I think this movie could have done with a bit more of, actually. More explanation of the gadgets and things like that, which Batman Begins did to death. But Well, we might talk about when we talk about the Batman that kind of this is running in now to some of these things that maybe long running shows like Doctor Who and long running franchises like Star Trek and Bond are doing. That almost everything's been done, right? What's left to be said after the Nolan trilogy? That I think the problem with Batman movies now is all of them from now on till the end of time are going to live in the shadow of the Burton Batmans and and Nolan's trilogy.
Yeah, always be compared to The Dark Knight, won't they? It's just like, is it good? Is it The Dark Knight, though? So, and it'll just be graded on the scale, really, won't it?
Well, me and Mike were talking on the way home in the car, as soon as we left, about things that were omitted from this film that we wish that were in there. And then we went, wait a minute, but that would be dialogue from The Dark Knight. So they couldn't do that because it was in The Dark Knight, and some things like that. So you're like, well, that would have been great, though, in this film, So it's kind of like you're sort of using pieces of the Dark Knight trilogy to fill in the gaps in this film,
I know what you mean. I actually was having a conversation once with someone about the Peter Capaldi version of the Doctor in Doctor Who, and they didn't like him very much. I do, but their criticism was like, he doesn't feel very distinctive. He's not, he doesn't feel like he's his own Doctor. He's a mishmash, a patchwork of characteristics from previous Doctors. I was like, well, he's the 12th one. I mean, what do you expect beyond a certain point? He's a magical space wizard. How much nuance can you bring to that? Beyond a certain point, it is just the mannerisms. It is just the accent. It is just how much you like the actor. It's just kind of, it's not.
Well, I always have this problem with watching movies like in franchises or continuing franchises where I'm like, should I go into this movie assuming Batman never existed? Or should I go into this movie, do they want me to go in thinking about the Chris Nolan trilogy? Or, what I mean? What should I bring to this? Should this work if have never heard of Batman? Should this work on that level? Or should it only work if the basics of the character, it's like, I guess it should work on that level if it's a standalone movie, because it's not a sequel. This is either the start of a franchise or it's a standalone. Yeah. So, it's tricky. How do you approach it,
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the 89 Batman didn't. It's not. People overstate this. It didn't exist in a cultural vacuum where no one had heard of Batman. Batman was a massive pop cultural icon and had been for decades. But there was less media, right? There was less audiovisual stuff. There was less what you might call general audience stuff. And obviously, you can't overstate how much more general audience meant that in the I was going to say pre-Batman, but pre-Spider-Man, pre-MCU.
Well, there've been constant comics, presumably, but the actual, the moving, sort of in motion picture terms, there hadn't been a Batman movie for 20 years or more.
Yeah, and even that was, Yeah, even that was a TV spin-off, basically, like a kind of well, I mean, the Batman show was always like a sort of Beatlemania outpouring, really, wasn't it? You know, it's like get something in the cinema that can make us money quick.
A Hard Day's Night or something, yeah.
Yeah.
Did
the Adam West TV show continue after the movie, or had it already stopped when the movie came out?
It did. It's more like, I mean, obviously a much shorter run in general. I think the Adam West show went for 4 seasons, but like it kind of, before it sort of the trend petered out, but I think it was like get the movie out ASAP, so it was almost more like the South Park movie in that sense. You know, it was like kind of quite in the early part of the show and just putting what the show did best on screen, which, you know, obviously that's a masterpiece. But I was gonna, don't even have time for that. But I was going to actually quickly, sort of mostly skirting over the Nolan trilogy, and it's actually partly just because I think we'll come back to that a lot more when we talk about the Batman in detail. One thing you guys didn't really talk about in your Batman 89 thing was your then relatively, well, more recent and still quite recent reactions to what Snyder's done with it in the past sort of...
Let me at him. Where is he? Let me at him.
It still hurts.
Oh, God.
So, I mean, that was the Batman vs. Superman obviously came out in 2016, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously you've got Batman cropping up a few minor times in the DC EU, as I think we call it.
Suicide Squad and the Justice League and stuff like that. Yeah.
Their mums had the same name. Their mums had the same name.
God's sake, don't.
I've not got over it yet. How long has it been? It's literally been funny. 6-7 years now.
It's funny, isn't it? But this is not a specific spoiler for the Batman, but someone does say the word Martha in this film, and it was actually. I thought that was one bit where I just literally thought too soon. Like I was just like, you can't. Like I appreciate you trying to include the plot point, but like I can't.
Yeah, it's like that's not fucking funny, Matt. That's not fucking funny, dude.
Yeah. It'd be funny if like, it just changed his mum's name in this to sort of acknowledge that. It was just like, it's Moira.
Maria.
Maria. To be fair, I thought that I had misheard it, and they said Maria. I was like, are they really going and renaming Bruce Wayne's mum just so that they don't have the Martha?
That'd be too meta, that then, wouldn't it?
I know. Can you imagine?
To the audience, like, I see what you did there.
Yeah. That would have been pretty funny. But I mean, Mike, what did you? I don't think we've ever really talked about that. Like, what did you think about? Let's just cut it down to like Batman vs Superman and whichever version of Justice League you're more comfortable talking about.
Yeah. In terms of Batman and
let's try and focus on Batman, I guess.
I'd say that I liked what they were kind of doing with him in terms of trying to make him into a more hardened vigilante, and he was branding people, and he was like a bit of an elder Batman who had kind of given up on trying to be the Justice, and he was like, okay, right, the tactic isn't working. I'm just going to start punching people a bit. I'm going to stop pulling my punches. And I thought that the detective side of him was kind of done rather neatly, but I think that maybe I was just like had such low expectations before watching it that when I actually saw him on screen, I was like, oh, you know what, he's not that bad. I kind of could see the inspirations from like the Arkham Asylum games and like the action scenes with him, and like his gadgets were pretty cool. But in hindsight, I feel like that was just me having very low expectations and not having them being met. They were just above. But I still preferred the Nolan, even the Keaton and stuff like that. So, and it's gotten much worse in the years since.
Right.
So I wasn't a big fan, but I was okay with it.
Well, I'll come back to you in a second, Matt, but I'm really glad that you mentioned the Arkham Asylum games, actually, because I'm not a big gamer, particularly not of sort of most contemporary recent games. I know that's quite an old game now, Arkham Asylum, but that series, Sure. Because that's alongside the Nolan trilogy, that's one of the most acclaimed Batman properties of the last sort of 15 years, isn't it? The Arkham.
Definitely. They
series.
sold ridiculously, didn't they? It was like one of the
Arkham
best-selling games of all time, isn't it?
Yeah, Arkham City is one of my favorite games of all time. It was absolutely mind blowing when that first came out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's moved on a bit since our Batman Returns SNES days, hasn't it, Matt?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. And they're throwing
which is a really fun game, I should say, but it's basically a Streets of Rage clone.
Yeah, getting two fat clowns and bashing them together. But the ability to throw people into shop windows is still so much fun, because I've been playing it on the original SNES that Uncle Mark has lent to me and Luca, which is fantastic. And it's still, but yeah.
So I love that you were introduced to Batman Returns way before you should have been, and now you're introducing Luca to the Batman Returns video game.
Oh no! Well, just for the record, I've not let him play it yet because even I have my limits of and my own censorship.
It's almost a Mortal Kombat game, that, isn't it? Like, to be honest,
it's literally like a Mortal Kombat game. You can literally kill people by throwing them through shop windows, and but that's the thing. Like, I know this point has been mentioned, but that's not so much in the past. But that's what I love about the Tim Burton Batman is he doesn't just kill people; he burns them alive for looting.
Yeah.
For looting. That's all that clown was doing, was just like robbing a teddy bear from a shop, and he burnt him alive.
Yeah. His lip curls while he throws people down manholes with bombs strapped to them.
With the dynamite, exactly.
He blew him up, and all he did was slightly assault him once.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear you guys' eventual take on Batman Returns, because that is, I mean, I'm not going to derail this and make that all about that, because will be hours, but like that.
Matt will do that himself, I'm pretty sure.
The subtle psychosis of Michael Keaton is something to behold. Like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my babies. It's like, it's so. Have you ever heard of suspension of disbelief? I think that phrase comes into my mind a lot when watching Batman Returns. Is much needed suspension of disbelief in those movies.
Too right. I mean, you know what? We'll move on to our spoiler-free take on the Batman itself in a sec. But I think I wanted to come back to something you were talking about. Is Batman for now at least, or kind of for this decade, just bound to be overshadowed by, I guess, primarily now the Nolan trilogy for most people our age or younger. And I think one thing I heard people complaining about the Snyder films was like whatever they thought about their qualities, because opinion did vary a great deal, and obviously those films have great defenders and everything. I hate them, but that's not, I know, that's my take. But sure. I remember people both persuasions thinking it is a bit soon. I remember hearing that a lot. Like, it's kind of, Batman versus Superman, for its merits or otherwise, it came out 4 years after The Dark Knight Rises, right? So like. Yeah. There was a very fresh and, as you say, very acclaimed and very distinctive version of Batman in the pop culture consciousness. And I think with that, you run into the fact that, in my opinion, Batman vs. Superman is a very bad film, but you also run into the fact that Ben Affleck is too famous, really, isn't he, to play him? I thought was part of the problem.
I must say that my problem was never with Batfleck. He was fine. I thought he played them both characters, both sides of the coin, perfectly well. I thought he was not the problem with those films at all. Right. And it's funny because going into them, you probably thought he would have been the problem with it. Batfleck is going to be the problem here. But he was, in my opinion, he wasn't even on the radar screen of the problems in that film.
That's so interesting because we'll get into talk about this more in a sec. But Robert Pattinson is arguably as famous, if not more famous, especially to a younger audience, than Ben Affleck, and probably up there with the most famous like pre-existing fame actors to take on the role, right? Because Adam West was known from The Show, which was very famous, but had only been famous for a year. Michael Keaton was a cult star, basically, like a cult comedian. George Clooney wasn't really famous yet; he was getting famous, and again mostly for TV. Val Kilmer was like a supporting actor in action movies and stuff like that, really. Christian Bale was still a bit of an up and comer, really, wasn't he? I mean, he'd done
American Psycho and stuff, but it was an indie darling, I'd say.
Whereas Robert Pattinson is a bona fide. Well, he's an odd position, isn't he? Because he's like, if you flash back 10 years, he's a bona fide superstar, but like of the younger film heartthrob variety, mostly through Twilight movies and others similar sort of properties. But he's famously spent about a decade now doing more what I guess film snobs like us would think of as more interesting movies, right?
Well, I've only just thought of this now, but he seems, you might say, casting against type, but at the end of the day, you can't get a more famous vampire than our Pats in Twilight, and then what's Batman if not essentially a vampire in a lot of ways? Yeah, and I never actually put two and two together until this moment, but it seems maybe less unlikely than I originally thought, as someone to play the Batman. But I suppose it's just essentially that going from Batfleck to this, you're going from the Arkham Asylum huge beefed up Batman to a more slender, younger Batman, But again, there was, when the movie rolled, there was no. I thought he did a brilliant job in this, and he was, of all the minor problems I have with this film, he wasn't one of them at all. Yeah. In fact, he was great. I thought he was absolutely superb.
I'd say, would you say, well, this is what I would think, but would you say the same kind of like furore would have happened where if, like, a few years after Titanic and William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Leonardo DiCaprio was cast as Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins? The same kind of thing would be like, what?
Yeah.
But
Well, actually, I'd say that, funnily enough, it involves the Batman franchise. I'd say the most apt comparison is Heath Ledger in some ways.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, same.
You have to cast your mind back, and you know, and also Michael Keaton was a comedy star.
Yeah,
you know,
Mr.
so
Mom
that, you know,
just
I mean,
come out
that,
and-
Mr. Mom, that was a headline. You know, Michael Keaton was playing Batman. Seems weird to me because in our generation he was nothing but Batman. You know, that's like when I found out he played Beetlejuice, I was in shock. You know, I remember being like, but what? You know, calm. Michael Keaton, stoic Michael Keaton played Beetlejuice. What, you know? But that's all he was known for, and in a way, and Heath Ledger is the same. That was certainly the same amount of shock, but for our generation.
It's funny though, isn't it? In your '89 episode, you played the clip of the "Let's Get Nuts" scene from where he vocally goes completely Beetlejuice for like a couple of lines. You know?
Yeah. He really. I bet there's some interesting outtakes of that scene on the cutting room floor. You know, just let Keaton go wild.
Just before we start talking a spoiler-free take on the Batman, and I'll ask you both for a sort of headline review before we talk about some of the vaguer elements of it. But like, did either of you see Cosmopolis, which came out about 4 or 5 years ago?
Was that the Cronenberg movie?
Yes.
Yeah. It's the Cronenberg movie based on the Dom DeLillo book Cosmopolis, which is about because I'm in a weird position, Mike, because I've read the book and not seen the movie. But it's but Robin Pattinson stars in it as, I believe, a jaded, detached billionaire, right?
Yes, essentially.
Yeah.
So do you think that's because I remember when Christian Bale got cast in Batman Begins, I'd seen American Psycho,
Right.
so I was like, less so from the Batman. I was just like, oh, that's a brilliant Bruce Wayne. Mm-hmm. Oh, like that straight up. And actually, one of my I like the Nolan movies, but one thing I don't like so much about them is that there's not quite as much Bruce Wayne being messed up in them as I would like, and it's a real shame because I think Christian Bale would have been amazing at that.
Yeah.
And he sort of is a bit in Batman Begins, which is actually my least favorite of the three. But but he gets to do more of that in that one.
Yeah, and I'd say in Dark Knight Rises, he's able, like, because they're taking down Bruce Wayne's money, and he has to really be a lot more of Bruce Wayne because Batman's been retired, and like with Miranda Tate, he has to try and be, you know, I can see where you're coming from. Like, he's not able to do it, but like, you make a really good point about how he's been kind of playing Bruce, but like a more obviously psychotic Bruce, but he's able to use like his yuppie kind of history as American Psycho to really help him. And in Cosmopolis, he essentially is just traveling around a city in the back of a limousine and getting out and like having adventures happen to him. But yeah, it is completely, he's losing his psyche essentially over the course of this horrible day. And yeah, you make a really good point. I hadn't actually put that together, but yeah, I shouldn't have been worried when he was cast. But to be fair, in the same way that I felt like Heath Ledger and Leo, when like maybe he joined Django Unchained, that he was able to kind of like reconstruct his image, and he's been really trying to do that. Robert Pattinson since Twilight, and he's been trying to like star in more avant-garde films, and the fact that like he was in The Lighthouse and he was absolutely amazing. And
I love that film.
Good Time, I think that he was really good in Good Time as well. And just this the way he's kind of been deconstructing, I was like, okay, so maybe he's going to bring like a bit more of a deconstructed edge to Bruce Wayne as well. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help but feel like I wanted more from it. I know that Matt just said that he was a big fan of him, but I just wanted a bit more from him. He was so kind of silent and brooding. I just wanted more from him to, I don't know, more 3D-ness from his 2D kind of character.
Got you. I was just going to say, let's get into the spoiler review of The Batman. And first, but just before we do that, I just want to ask you guys, and this is, I should have primed you for this more really, because it's a tricky question, but I ask it because we'll revisit this at the very end of the podcast and talk about where the Batman ranks in your sort of affections. We're not going to like rank the Batman movies. That's ridiculous. You can't. There's such different beasts, you know. But like, what's your leaving aside the Batman for the moment? What's your favourite Batman movie? Like, if you just wanted to stick one on tomorrow night or whatever, you know, like what's your
Batman
your heart of hearts? Yeah, I didn't think that would take you that long.
Yeah. And Dark Knight for me, although Batman Begins is slightly second.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I was thinking about this, obviously, because I had the run-in. I think I'd probably have to go with Matt and say Batman Returns, but I do really like a lot of them, and I actually really like Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, me too.
which is not to say I agree with its politics. I think it's the most cogent thing at all times, but it's I just think it's very memorable and vivid and odd.
I think it's brilliantly mean-spirited. I think that's what I like about The Dark Knight Rises, is it feels kind of, strangely, a bit like, not in very different ways than Joker, but similarly to that. It was a lot more mean-spirited than I thought on Bleak, which I was that's what I really enjoyed about it. But I'm glad you like Batman Returns so much. I knew you liked it, but I didn't think it would be, certainly didn't think it would be number one on your list, to be honest.
I think it's my favourite because I came to it at the same time for many of the same reasons you did, and because it's got, and this is definitely going to fit into the Batman actually, it's got for me a sweet spot mix of high gothic kind of grandeur and grimness and seriousness, but also ridiculousness and campness, and it's got loads of great performances, and it comes close to a very good blend of all those things. And with that, I tell you what, let's start with you, Matt. What's your basic reaction to the Batman?
I think, in the words of our friend Jack, I think we needed a total refresh rather than a weak imitation. That's my basic summary. I've softened somewhat since last night and since watching it. I felt very strongly in that direction when I left the cinema. But now that I've had time to think of the narrative strands, I think that it holds together a lot better than I initially thought. But it's still... it's not even in the same league as Batman vs Superman in terms of problems. That was a car crash. This is a slightly weak imitation of a fucking masterpiece Nolan movie, I think. Right. Okay, that's a good starting point. I should say, obviously, everyone knows that we're doing a hot take on this. At the moment, recording in early 2022, we've all only seen this once. So this is, by its very nature, our opinions may evolve. And I don't know when I'm next going to watch the movie, but my opinion in a year, 5 years, 10 years might be very different. But I'm keen to see it again already. Put it that way. Yeah, I'm quite keen, and maybe not immediately, but I'm quite keen as well. Mike, what's your sort of headline take on it?
I felt like it had way too much pressure to follow the Nolan trilogy, and in trying to do so, it tried to do a lot, but ended up doing too much. It tried to have so many features that it didn't put enough effort into them, and it could have done with one less plot thread and just more time being spent on the others. So it was entertaining. I was never bored, but I don't feel like I need to watch it again anytime soon. Interesting. I really didn't think I was going to come at this being the one who liked this the most out of the three of us. But I sense that's kind of where I am, and that's not me saying it's perfect. I don't. Well, obviously none of them are perfect, but this definitely has. I have gripes with this, sure. And I have things that are gripes in afterthoughts, but I also have things that were gripes at the time and things that took me out of it and things that I didn't engage with that well. But I think my sort of 24 hours later take is, I think it might be one of the best Batman movies, and I hope we'll get into that a bit more about what we might mean by that, what I might mean by that, and I'm completely prepared, particularly by the very end of the podcast, that you guys might have talked me out of that opinion. Can I just say, I think that the Hail to the Thief was my least favourite Radiohead album for about 5 days of my life, right, when it first came out. So let's put it that way. Yeah, and as listeners to this podcast know, we've done an episode on that. So yeah. Well, let me get a bit more, because in the spoiler-free bit, we'll talk a bit more about the stuff we can talk about, and I think that's one of those things. I think without getting too spoiler, we've talked about it a bit before with Pattinson. I really, particularly because you guys have talked a bit more about him already, I'll start. But I was expected to be impressed because I've liked him in a lot of things, and I liked him in The Lighthouse and everything, and he impressed me more than I thought he was going to, actually, and that was on a few levels. I liked the broodingness of it. I didn't think that was always the best conveyed thing. I think I've got bones to pick with the way it was presented at times and things. But I thought his actual physicality of it and the way he was a sort of depressed but also very angry Bruce Wayne. A lot of the time I thought he had more of a raw anger to him, also sort of Bruce Banner level anger to him at times. I thought, with the way they worked in the violence. I thought he looked the part, or a version of the part. I thought he looked. I'll be frank. I thought he looked gorgeous. They even give a gratuitous topless shot, which was, the only thing that could get my eyes off Zoe Kravitz. To be frank, I'm really looking forward to gushing about this film because there was so much that I liked, about it, and he is one of the things that I thought was superb. For me, it's the key set pieces.
you know, where you're like, oh, that's been done and done better. That's been done and done better. That's been done and done better. However, in between all of that, the combat scenes, the choreography of the combat was exceptional and probably the best I've ever seen in a Batman movie. The performance of Pattinson, I loved. I had no qualms with that at all. So there's so much I want to talk positively about. I'm sick of shitting on this film now because I just feel like I had to get the bad stuff out there first, because, you know, when I left the cinema, me and Mike were both a little down about it, you know, and we had things we wanted to say, but there's so much good to say about it, which I'm looking forward to going into.
I think there is bad to say. Like, we'll talk about this more in the specifics, but I think there's, for instance, for me, there's an action set piece roughly in the middle of the movie that I just think doesn't work for me, really.
Okay, yeah.
But you know, but that will, your mileage will vary. That might be some people's highlight of the movie. I think one thing I really liked about Pattinson is, and this feeds into the sort of mood of the film as a whole, and so I suppose it's very well highlighted by the cinematography and stuff. I thought there was a great, and it is quite comic booky. It's actually, you know what? It's a strength of the movie. It was directed by Matt Reeves, obviously, who's probably most known for directing the second and third Planet of the Apes movies, which is funny because they're very influenced by the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. So this is kind of a, you know, full circle. And actually, I can see a lot of your argument of, like, you know, this is a warmed up imitation, you know, it comes via that Matt Reeves DNA. But I thought it actually had and I can't believe I'm praising it for this quality, kind of a very Snyder-esque way of presenting frames like they were from a graphic novel at times. And one thing I really loved was the physicality of Pattinson when he's in the suit and he's in the middle of people, you know, of non-vigilantes, but which is everyone else, you know, when he's in the middle of the cops, for instance, and the civilians. And I thought there was a weird, and again, it's partly the way it's framed and lit and everything, but there was a weird kind of hyper-realism to it where it's almost like you're looking at a surrealist painting or something, where it's like, I felt that the film in general conveyed the weirdness of this guy standing in the middle of ordinary people, like in a way I don't think I'd seen it before, where it's like, there's some great scenes, I won't get into the specifics, but there's some great scenes where he enters a room and everyone thinks he's ridiculous and that he's terrifying. And I love that as a take, because he's both of those things.
You feel that he could really hurt everyone in the room. He could kill everyone. However, he isn't that far from being hurt himself as well. They could yank the mask off if there was enough of them, you know, but he just avoids it now. So there's that constant level of threat. And what I was talking about to a colleague today in work was, I love the fact that in the fight scenes, you know, in terms of gadgetry, he only uses the gadgets when he's about to be overcome, which I really love. So you feel like he's really, you know, about to get overcome by 3 or 4 guys, then he gets the taser out. You know, and it's like, so it's this thing of like, he's using kind of almost minimal force in a way until he needs to. And that thing, so again, you do feel like, you know, minus the gadgets, he could be in serious trouble, you know, which is great. So I thought they played that just brilliantly. You know, the more I think about those action set pieces, the more I love them. I just think they were just superb.
Well, one thing, this is hard to talk about without talking too specifically, but I think one thing this channels quite well is something that even the Nolan films only got into a little bit, maybe in like the early part of Batman Begins, and then maybe again a bit in The Dark Knight Rises, where this is kind of a Batman who might be the closest to like a suicidal Batman that we've seen in a way, isn't it? Like, he's so detached and like visibly traumatized and, as I say, angry. And he gets into so many... It twins with his vulnerability, doesn't it? His physical vulnerability, because he does get into situations that you think are like ridiculously overwhelming, almost in a way where it's like, does he want to come out of this? You know, like...
Yeah. No, I felt that with some of the gunshot. There was a scene in it in particular where I thought maybe he is going to actually try and kind of give up at one point. Are we on spoilers now? What are we doing?
No, we're not
broken yet. Okay, cool. I'll save that then. But yeah.
No, I agree. There was like a few scenes where like he does hurt himself a lot, and you feel like in like fight scenes that he does, like, there are bruises. There are, like you say, the vulnerability is there. But I think it's a great way of, I don't know, showing you early Batman without really telling you that it's early Batman. Yeah. The fact that like the police are still very hesitant to have him in the crime scenes, or he is standing out, and it is really awkward. And I feel like that kind of got that across really well. But also just how much he doesn't really fit the scene is really interesting, just because I'm so used to the character that, like, of course Batman would be in the crime scene, but they put you in like the frame of mind of the police and see him being like, oh god, this guy is actually like a psycho who dresses like a bat and is thinking that he could. But not only that, but the detective thing was really interesting. Like that they show him noticing things that other people don't really well. I felt, and that kind of came across as like, okay, so there is reason for him to be in here because he is noticing things that other people aren't. I don't mean to be a spoiler about that, but
this is a terrible thing to say, but I thought about Ace Ventura at one point.
Yeah,
I guess you got things, all caught up here, apart from that spot of blood on the railing over there.
Yeah.
I love that the Jim Carrey comparison you ended up making was with Batman and not with the film's antagonist.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
But I thought they did that really well. They featured it really well and kind of, again, made you in the point of view of one of the policemen who were just like, why is this guy? Oh, okay, yeah, he is noticing things that we're not, so fair play.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of decided in the non-spoiler bit, it's almost impossible to talk about any of the other characters, really, because the film is quite plotty in a way. So there's a lot of, you'll just end up talking about spoilers innately if you start talking about the characters and the decisions they make with them.
But I mean, without going into spoilers, I do feel like you can talk about just how the actors really perform as the characters and how I feel like no one really did a bad job. I felt like Zoe Kravitz was a really good Catwoman. I felt like Colin Farrell was an amazing Penguin.
Yeah,
he lost himself in the role, and it's probably one of my... I mean, like, I know you guys love Batman Returns, and you'd love Danny DeVito as the Penguin, but I really liked this more realistic version of him. And, like, they've been trying to do him in different ways, like in the Gotham TV show as, like, this really, like, thin, big-nosed guy who's like not really a gangster, but this guy felt like he actually was a legitimate threat, and probably maybe more inspired from the Arkham Asylum games and stuff like that. But I felt like he was definitely good, and Paul Dano was amazing. And I wanted more Andy Serkis as Alfred, because I just thought that he was unique enough away from, say, Jeremy Irons or Michael Caine as just a bit of a rough and tumble, and you can kind of understand why he's been taught, Bruce Wayne has been taught like his fighting style by this kind of gruff Alfred instead.
There's more I wanted to know is like how's he got the limp, like, how did that happen, like, there's lots of kind of I definitely wanted like at least 2 more Alfred scenes and like more Batcave action.
Exactly.
Well, what I liked about the Alfred, both the portrayal of Alfred and the portrayal of Bruce Wayne together and as individuals was they are tough. They're both tough people, but tough characters, but they're both kind of, well, I mean, obviously Bruce Wayne much more so than Alfred. They're both damaged characters. They're both traumatized and grieving. But the Waynes, and we'll talk loads more about the Waynes, I'm sure. But like, they're not. It's not macho bullshit, if I can make that distinction. It's kind of, they're not tough for the sake of it. It's like, and when Batman does unhinged and violent things in this and risky things in this, which he often does, I think it probably comes the closest to it, because a Batman movie can never quite do this. It can never quite admit that being Batman is a bad thing, because then you wouldn't really have the franchise anymore. But it can. I think this came pretty close on a few occasions, and it's not just that he's making bad decisions temporarily. It's like the whole thing is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I thought for him and for the health of him and everyone around him, and I think it came maybe the closest I've seen like a relatively mainstream, well, it is a mainstream superhero, it's a huge superhero film, to saying that really. And we'll get more into that on the spoilers, but I thought that impressed me.
It felt like the least involved Alfred has been in the Batman project, because in the other movies it's like, Michael Caine saying you have to be this way when you are Batman, but he was very supportive of the dual role. But in this, it was basically Alfred saying, like, you need to be Wayne. Like, what the hell are you doing this? But, it felt a bit more like he was almost uninvolved, really, in the Batman process. I mean, he helped out with the ciphers and stuff like that. But in terms of, like, building the machines and kind of, like, encouraging, more armor, more weapons, whatever, he didn't feel like he was involved in that process as much.
Well, there's much more of a sense of him, actually, and Alfred feeds into this, of this is a Bruce Wayne who is neglecting his other responsibilities. Like, this is a character who actually has quite a lot to live for. It's just he can't see it anymore.
He hasn't got the balance right. He hasn't got the Bruce Wayne and Batman balance right at all. He's getting too much invested in Batman, and I believe even he says, like, at the beginning, like, I don't sleep anymore. I am nocturnal, and I'm putting way too much effort into it. And you could see Serkis's Alfred trying to bring him back into that and trying to balance that out. But obviously we're going to talk about this in more of the spoiler things, but I just wanted more time given to that relationship. I felt like that was rushed, and that arc was only done rather quickly, and I wanted more from that. That was just one of my gripes with it.
I can definitely agree with that. I think one thing that struck me is, you talk about this sort of Batman being a bit more, he's sort of out of control, he's jaded, and he's beaten down and everything. Yeah, as I say, he's on the point of depression. I would see it as angry depression. One thing I thought it did really well actually was taking a bunch of stuff that I hadn't liked so much in previous Batman movies and actually recasting them or recombining them in ways that I did like. So, like, I actually really like the way this isn't Batman Begins. As you say, it's not an origin story, but it's sort of an earlier version of Batman relatively to some of the other adaptations. And it's also, like Batman 89, for example, it starts and he's already Batman, and a lot of people know that this is happening, and I like that. But I also like the way, I think it more successfully did the thing that Snyder was trying to do with Ben Affleck. I thought it showed that character who actually is just just losing himself.
The rage,
the rage of it, and the kind of how scary that figure would be to be around, and not just if you're a Kryptonian, just kind of, because he is quite a scary presence in this, and I think we'll have quite a lot to say about him and Zoe Kravitz's relationship in that actually as well, because I think this is also one of the more successful Bruce Wayne Selina Kyle dynamics or sort of vibes, I suppose, that I've seen on screen.
Yeah,
but I'd
agree.
We can talk about that. I suppose before we take a break and then move on to spoilers, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the score, because that was one of the things that I found myself. Some people say that a score is good if you're not noticing it, right? I know it's a bit of a cliche, and I'm sure you disagree with that on some levels, Matt. But this was definitely a film where I started noticing the score probably about a third of the way through, and it wasn't because I was bored, because that can happen as well. If you're not seeing anything else of value in a film, you can just be like, oh well, the music's nice. This wasn't that. I just started noticing how it was really well. Sort of accenting and adapting things that have been in previous Batman scores, but without. And I thought particularly the Burton ones actually. I mean, you must have noticed the sort of sinewy strings that started accompanying Selina, for example.
Well, in Batman Returns, especially, they will say this. It's like the Batman '89 was about 40% scored. Batman Returns are like 85% scored. There's music all the time, and every character has their own theme. Selina Kyle, like you said, has the sinewy string sounds going on constantly, and that was played upon quite a lot. But what was interesting to me was that it was much more of a romantic score, I think, or kind of a melancholy, romantic, certain words that you could use to describe it. Very large, quite grand, but it wasn't an action score. There was there was some generic kind of deep timpani drums as you have the action sequences, but the actual main score, especially at the funeral sequence, the memorial, was really beautiful. That's when I started noticing it more, because I always thought this is really kind of for a Batman movie.
Quite far away from Hans Zimmer, I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with the Hans Zimmer score for the Dark Knight movies, but I think it's very distinctive. But I thought that was one thing where it wasn't just trying to do that again or a dilute version of that. It had a different mood to it.
Who was the composer for this? Was it?
I'll just look that up while we're doing it, because I did want to credit him, and I meant to note that down before we.
Off the top of my head, I think it might have been Michael Giacchino.
This sounds good. The score was done for this movie by Michael Giacchino. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I thought so.
And one thing I liked about that was I kept thinking they would, as they actually briefly did in at least the theatrical version of Justice League, I thought they were actually going to go into the Danny Elfman score, particularly towards the end of the movie, without talking about what's going on then. But they didn't. But they were channeling enough of it that I was like, this is getting to the equally anthemic part without being derivative. I just thought it was a really nice balancing act in general,
It was most Danny Elfman. I think you're right in the Selina Kyle theme. That was a really nice touch, and there was some costume parts as well that me and Mark were talking about. When that's just totally Tim Burton's Catwoman right there.
And it was good that, wasn't it? Because she's on almost every other level, she's very different from the Michelle Pfeiffer version. So it was just nice to have those little things to tie it together, wasn't it? She actually, this isn't a spoiler, but Zoe Kravitz, I read, voiced Catwoman in the Lego Batman movie, which is a version of Batman I realised we didn't talk about at all. But I actually really enjoyed that movie. But although it's got that Lego movie sort of. I'm almost not sure how many times I could watch it, at least without a kid being involved, because it just it's just the energy is just through the roof, isn't it? It's just kind of it's almost like a bit Ritalin addled kind of Batman, but
yeah. Well, the biggest movie pleasant surprises for me were Heath Ledger as the Joker, Anne Hathaway as Catwoman, and the Lego movie. These were all moments where you thought, oh, you should not judge a book by its cover.
No, not at all.
I think I told you at the time, Matt, but one thing I loved about the Lego Batman movie that I literally don't know if it comes from any comics. I'm not sure, but the idea of Batman sending himself to the Phantom Zone, partly because of his own self-loathing, I was just like, that's great. That's a great way to put Batman with the Superman mythos, and that's so much more thoughtful than anything in Batman versus Superman by such a mile.
Yeah, and it feels like something that could actually happen here as well. Because you were saying about the depression of the character as well.
And now for all the listeners of Matt and Mike Ball Focus, if anyone would like to avoid spoilers, we are going to be speaking about the plot details of The Batman. So please skip to this time code if you would like to avoid them.
So I getting out of the spoiler zone then, we got loads of stuff to discuss. I've got a few things in my notes here that I want to cover quickly. Well, sort of almost too much to get through, really. But so let's just start with the Riddler. Okay, because this was teased, I think at least a year and a half, 2 years ago, that not only was the Riddler going to feature in this in some guise or another, but Paul Dano, I think about at least a year ago, was revealed as being cast in that. Paul Dano, someone, I mean, you guys literally discussed There Will Be Blood on your show, didn't you? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah,
very excited to see him in the role.
Yeah, and it's safe to say about 90% of what I was actually excited about going into the Batman was Paul Dano. I actually found a lot more good in the film than I was expecting to, as I sort of said before. But he was a big part of my reason for the hype. The way I guess let's start with you, Mike. What's your reaction to this version of the Riddler, and I guess the way the film hangs its plot around him?
I liked it in the same way that, in the lead up to it, I kind of thought that it was going to be essentially David Fincher's version of Batman. And me and Matt even kind of mentioned this when we were watching it, really. But he seemed to be, I don't know, kind of inspired by his Prisoners character, the Denis Villeneuve film. And so I was excited about him playing the role and it being set in such a grimy, grim kind of universe as this one seems to be, that Matt Reeves seems to be inspiring it, like in the Seven universe, like with it just being raining all the time. But I was excited about him being like the John Doe character of like Seven, like the criminal mastermind who was like killing all these people for some certain reason, and him being like the man behind the mask and creating everything, and him being like smarter than Batman and having to I thought it was like fantastic casting. I thought Paul Dano was going to be such a great weaselly kind of smart aleck kind of character, and I was definitely happy with the result in one way, but then not happy in another. I was excited by the Riddler, but I wasn't happy with Edward Nashton or whatever his name was. When it's revealed of like who his actual character is, when that's revealed and then he's in the cell talking to him, it was too maniacal and too kind of pantomime-esque, I felt, for myself. I wanted him to be more demure. I wanted him to be more in control of things. I wanted a Hannibal Lecter rather than a man who's getting up and starting to sing, and obviously being that sort of tapped. I wanted it to be more muted.
The way he grins at him when he first comes in, I thought, oh, this is good. We're bringing it down. He's going to be a different character than he is on the videos. He's going to be so much calmer. And I was a bit disappointed that he kind of went a bit off the rails, because I thought it would have been so much more disturbing if he was just this sweet guy in glasses just smiling up at him with his like big hamster cheeks,
Yeah. I wanted John Doe at the back in the back of the police car being so like in control of everything. Like I've obviously seen in the trailers that he allows himself to be arrested. So I was like, okay, this is all part of his master plan. I know that's happening. But then that's when it kind of, I don't know, it became disappointing for me, unfortunately. I still liked his performance, and I still feel like he's a good version of the Riddler, and I'm happy to see him performing as it.
Another major set piece that is not just a rip-off of one movie, but two movies. So you're like, oh, this is the part where he hands himself in. This is the part,
Detective!
Exactly, yeah. And this is also that bit in The Dark Knight where the Joker does the same thing. Yeah, so I'm like, right, okay, so there was very much that kind of hanging over it for me, where I was just like, okay, we've seen this done. Yeah. We've seen this done arguably better. This movie needs its own set pieces now, please.
But before then, I was very happy with it.
It's interesting, some of the scenes near the end, like he does go full Daniel Plainview, the house is on fire, doesn't he? Like, he just ratchet it fully up into that sort of register. But it's funny you mention The Dark Knight, actually, because I think, like, both in terms of the plot sort of impetus he has and the performance, it's interesting to compare him to Ledger, isn't it? Because I'd almost say, like, this has a sort of lower range, as you say, a more Kevin Spacey and Seven kind of range, and then goes much higher than Heath Ledger ever does as well.
Yeah,
it's got all the treble and bass and none of the mid. Almost like
especially with the hostage videos that he sends in, that I thought they were creepy, but I couldn't help feel like, again, the shadow of Heath Ledger's fantastic ones yeah, it was trying to emulate and trying to.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember critics, because there were critics of the Dark Knight, or at least aspects of the Dark Knight trilogy, and even the Dark Knight didn't escape some criticism. But like,
see if you can name three of them.
Well, I'll just refer people to that other video that I referred to in the show notes. But I remember some people saying that the Joker in the Dark Knight was too much like the Riddler. And that was because he sets them sort of tasks and puzzles, and you can say they're jokes. Most of them involve some sort of twist or something like that. Or like turnaround of expectations. But I thought the other similarity here, where you've got Paul Dano's Riddler, is he's got a message, hasn't he? And again, that feeds into the John Doe thing, doesn't it? Like he basically, like Heath Ledger in the Dark Knight, he has, whether you think it's got any substance to it or not, that's a whole other question. But he has some beliefs that he has about society. Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of almost like abstract crusade, isn't it? Because he's not really. It's funny because this Riddler's all about identifying like guilty people and stuff like that, and killing them. Not even like setting them up or anything like that. Just full on serial killer killing them. Yeah. But it's more of a abstract social point he's making, isn't it, about these? But these are just the people who happen to be playing these roles in society in Gotham. Mm-hmm. He's making more of a point that these sort of people are the problems, right?
Yeah, corrupt politicians and corrupt government officials, and him being a vigilante in his own right, but doing it in a different way that's not, I don't know, seemingly helped by the police. And he's taking such violent justice rather than what Batman's doing, which I kind of appreciated. Like when he, again, thankfully we're in spoiler territory, but when like he gets to the end and it's like, yeah, you and me are a team, we're doing this together. I was happy about that kind of analysis of, like you said before in the spoiler-free section, when Batman's rage and his anger is all that's like consuming him at the minute, and he is using it just as an excuse to beat up people seemingly, and he's not really targeting the right people. He's targeting the gangs and people when he should be targeting like the people that Riddler is kind of targeting in a way, and that being like a bit of a black mirror to him, and showing off that when the goon at the end says like, "I'm vengeance," and like he's able to go like, "Oh God, yeah, I've been saying that this entire time." But hey, I wanted more of that. I wanted more of an analysis on it. I wanted him to like be able to like look down in his hands and be like, "Oh my God, what have I done? What have I become?" But it's just kind of skirted over really quickly, I felt.
That's interesting. I've got two things to say on that, because one of them is that I found that some of that stuff, because it's almost like it's fully a cliche of the superhero genre at this point. The baddie saying, "We're not so different, you and I," and like making these comparisons, whether or not they're grounded. I thought that one good thing about this was it wasn't so much he was saying our aims are the same or our ethos is the same. He was saying our methods are often the same. Yeah. And I was like, and not only that, but your methods have helped me. And I was like, I thought they really narrowed that, because you don't fully understand what's going on in this till later in the film. But I love that the opening is you're with, as it turns out, the Riddler when he's stalking the current mayor, with the binoculars, the sort of digital binoculars. And I love that later in the film when it's when Batman is first tracking down Selina to her apartment, he's using what look like the identical binoculars. And I think for maybe more paranoid viewers, it might even be like, oh, are they actually going to go full on Batman is a serial killer, and he's actually schizophrenic. He is the Riddler as well. But I love that it doesn't have to do that, because the Riddler kind of makes that point. It's like, no, you're like me. You're as creepy as I am. You're doing this, and you're more violent than I am. You're doing this stuff. You're the violent tool that I'm using here.
Yeah. You make a good point, because at the beginning, when that scene did start from someone's point of view looking through binoculars, I, for one part, was like, okay, are we in Batman's or in the Riddler's point of view?
I thought we were doing the origin story of the Batman for a moment, because I thought there's a kid, there's two parents in a posh gaff, they're going to go out and get them, we're going to do this again. So it's weird, I was kind of slightly disappointed or disheartened for a moment, because I thought, I really hope this movie doesn't do the getting shot outside the opera scene. But yeah, it almost, when we saw that in Zack Snyder's Batman versus Superman, I felt like, oh God, here we in the Joker as well, yeah. Except what I loved, the Joker, I thought did it really, really well, because it showed that, the Joker did, directly kill his parents, so that was quite clever. But yeah, no, totally. I just thought we really don't need that again. So I'm glad they didn't show that in the movie.
Yeah,
I want to talk about Joker again. Actually, when we come back to talking a little bit more about Thomas Wayne and the sort of legacy of Thomas Wayne, because I think that's an interesting parallel that we didn't really touch on before, and I think this follows that film down a few rabbit holes, which I think are quite interesting. But didn't you think, Matt, that it's interesting that, because you were just talking about the sort of fake out of it being the Wayne's murder, essentially, or prelude to the Wayne's
Yeah.
murder. That's exactly what Batman 89 does.
Yeah, yes, that's true, yeah, because we follow that family at the beginning trying to get a taxi, and then they end up getting mugged and not murdered, but just mugged. But yeah, no, that's absolutely true. There's a lot of things that this movie actually, I think it paid so many homages to Batman 89, actually, when you think about it, which is great, and I'm really glad it did, because it's great to see the Tim Burton movies acknowledged more in these movies. But also, I think that when you get to the set pieces, like, for example, like the car, when you first see the car, I thought that is basic this isn't a car moment, from The Dark Knight, Rises and stuff. It's just like, the car appearing in an alleyway, the tool you didn't know that Batman had, and that kind of stuff. And again, it's just like, it was done well, and it was an amazing sequence, but it was just what we've seen before done slightly differently, and but in a very, very similar way. And I felt that there were so many scenes like that in this movie, and those were its weaknesses for me.
Well, you know what, to dial down from the sort of maybe grander thematic stuff, although we'll get back to that, like, what did you think of the Batmobile, just on a basic level?
I was a little disappointed at first in its look. I saw it early in trailers and things like that. But what I liked about it is the way that they used it in this movie, and the fact that it felt very handmade and very rickety, like it could fall apart at any point. And it wasn't particularly clear to me, but was the point when it revved up that it was meant to have stalled? Was that the idea, when you get that stall and then the Penguin's able to kind of start getting away? Was that meant to be that he was firing it up to go and it didn't work? Because that wasn't really very clear.
I'm not sure, because I know nothing about cars, and also because I couldn't see anything in that scene.
Yeah.
I thought the rain in that scene was ridiculous. I was saying there was an action scene in the middle that didn't work for me. That was largely that. I actually really liked the intro to the Batmobile itself, and I loved the way it was introduced in the same way that Batman himself was introduced in that subway scene.
Yeah.
Where it's a horror movie essentially.
Yeah.
It's a real scary horror movie coming out of the shadows.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly, it was great.
It showed that Bruce has these tried and tested techniques that he uses to intimidate people, so that was kind of cool, yeah.
Yeah, there's a routine to it, there's a theatricality to it, and it's kind of, it's putting you in that perspective of the criminals, which actually the beginning of Batman 89 does as well.
Yeah.
So show you how scary it is. But the actual action sequence I just found incoherent, basically, just straightforwardly incoherent. I couldn't tell what was going on. It was complete IMAX overload.
Yeah, we needed like an aerial view at one point to look down and get the geography a little bit more, because I never quite knew where we were and where everyone was. I kind of like that in the way that I like the fact that it's like the scene in Aliens, when you're watching the Hive fight through the CCTV monitors. It's like, I get the fight is supposed to be confusing, and it's kind of like, it shows how these cars could crash so easily and stuff. So I didn't hate it probably as much as you did, but I do think you did need a sort of a wide shot at some point to show what was going on.
Yeah. What did you think of John Turturro as Falcone? Because that was a thing I really enjoyed as well.
But he's just perfect, isn't he? He's great. Why hasn't he been in a Batman movie before?
Yeah, he's a very good actor. Hot take.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't think he was going to be in the plot as much as he was. I didn't think he was going to be that intricate in terms of the plot of the corruption of the city, but it kind of makes sense in hindsight now. But with everybody being so highlighted in terms of their amount of time in the trailer, Turturro hardly got a look in, and I thought it was going to be mainly about the Riddler. But that's kind of what I mean about how bloated I felt it was. I felt like there were the Riddler was going after too many corrupt people. I felt like maybe one or two, but not 3 or 4 or 5 like it was by the end.
That's a fair criticism. And yeah, there's quite a lot in it. Yeah,
and if you cut out one of them, then you're able to give more time to maybe him and Alfred, maybe some more stuff between the side things of the droplets and being drop heads and there being a drug thing.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't feel like that was necessary. It seemed like it wanted to be like Chinatown in sort of a way. Okay, we're taking over Salvatore Maroni's crime syndicate and it's all going to Carmine Falcone, and okay, that's there, but then that's involving the the government officials, and I understand why the Riddler wants that to be eradicated of all of it, but I just felt like just have the renewal fund, which is the heart of it, just be given to corrupt politicians. Don't involve dropheads. Don't involve crime syndicates and rings. And I just felt like that.
Yeah, pick a plot. Pick a plot. What is this film about? Yeah. Is it about the Riddler's arc and his his mission? Is it about Selina? Is it about Batman? It's and I've seen it done a lot worse in other movies, for example, like Batman versus Superman. But like, you know, there's other, you know, it wasn't completely terrible because you did kind of get conclusions to each story, but it did feel like it was more like, you know, the film needs a clear mission statement, and I didn't quite get what the point of the movie was in terms of, like, the scene at the end, for example, frustrated me a lot because, you know, Bruce, at the end, Selina basically says, come away with me, but we can do this together somewhere else. We can be Batman and Catwoman. The Bat and the Cat has a nice ring to it, she says. That's not a challenge, because it's like saying, just keep being what you are, but somewhere else in a different shit city. It's like, okay, if she'd said, like, it would be the reverse of the Batman Returns speech. You know, if Selina said to him, leave this all behind, come with me, we can have a normal life, and then Bruce says, I can't, you know, I'm Hope, I need to stay here. That would be a really great conclusion, I thought. You know, maybe a little obvious, but, you know, but the fact at the end, I thought, why is he so upset? I don't get, well, what's he missing? Like, you know, she's ready for him to be Batman in any situation. It's not like, you know what I mean? There was little conflict there, I thought, apart from the fact that she's going that way and he's going that way. I was like, you know, they weren't changing.
Well, you know what? We can just segue into Selina straight from there. I was just going to say briefly, like, I think this is an overcomplicated movie in some ways, and I think. And by that, I don't mean that by faint praise. I mean that is a flaw, I think. But you could look at it as almost like Matt Reeves' ambition is almost to do like the 3-hour version of The Wire for Gotham, right? You know, 'cause this is trying to connect up all the things, right? And it's even doing that. It's doing that with the mob stuff. It's doing that with the police corruption stuff. It's doing that with the Riddler's views, which I think we might come back to a little bit, especially as they relate to sort of electoral politics. I thought, you know, obviously I found that very interesting. But it's also going down to the, as you say, a little bit the drug dealers, although I think that's an under-examined bit of the movie. Not that it needed another thing, but that is. And then basically it sort of PGs it a bit, but the sex workers, right? You know, like the kind of the mistreating and actually murdered women at the bottom of the pyramid, basically. You know, and it's trying to do a lot of that, and it intrigues me when it says that they're trying to set up TV shows off the back of this as well as possible sequel movies, because it does feel like they're going a lot further than Nolan, for example, in trying to create a real synoptic Gotham, you know, like that you could imagine living and having this ecosystem, you know, and things about the end of the movie point towards that, don't they? But building on what you're saying, Matt, about Selina Kyle as a character in this, in general, as a character in the Batman mythos, but in this specifically, I think she does tend to represent a form of escape for Batman, but it can be a sort of hedonistic escape. It can be an escape into a life of crime. It can be an escape into a different sort of vigilantism, or the more of the way it's hinted at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, an escape into a quote-unquote normal life, whatever that means for a billionaire. I think in this it's more that she's showing what a limited form of vengeance looks like, because she takes vengeance. She literally avenges. We didn't even really talk about sexuality yet. She avenges her lover / co-worker, you know, who she's obsessed with avenging, and she does. And then she can let it go, right? Yeah,
it works.
She's done
for
what
her.
He can't do.
Yeah.
And he can never. Well, this is the main thing about Batman, isn't it? That makes him compelling. It's like he can never ever do that. He can never get that.
Yeah. I think you make a good point. Like, in terms of the Riddler, he wants like a whole justice-wide revenge. Bruce wants like to get out of the anger of his parents dying, and takes it out on like the low-level thugs, and yet Catwoman just wants revenge from just that one person. Which is why I'm fine with it being like, make that Peter Sarsgaard's character. Don't involve Carmine Falcone and make him the dad of Catwoman, and make it even more complicated, and therefore have like the big crescendo involving so many different spinning plates. But you make a really good point about how it's a really good analysis on just revenge on like a personal scale as compared to like what Riddler and Batman are trying to do. Yeah, completely.
I mean, Matt, what did you think of Zoe Kravitz in this in general? And I think I'm sort of most interested in the sort of performance and chemistry she had with Pattinson.
In terms of performance, I mean, they're absolutely amazing and great. And again, the choreography of her fight scenes and the way that she used her, her gadgets and stuff like that was just superb and brilliant. However, it would have been 10 times better if I hadn't seen The Dark Knight Rises. Because, again, it was taking the cat burglar thing and just doing that again, which is, kind of fine. And that was never really explained. Like, again, I think that you have to, in a super realistic world, you have to explain how these people can kung fu fight and how they can, because with Batman at least you kind of got Alfred trained him, so we know Alfred was like in the SAS and stuff like that, so you know that he's like a badass fighter. You're like, where did Selina learn all this stuff from? The streets? Like, she's amazing, like she's superhumanly amazing and stuff like that, so again, it's these inconsistencies that I loved the look of it, the aesthetic of it. It was brilliantly done, but again, it just didn't quite ring true. And in a super realistic movie with nothing supernatural in it, which is what this is, I think that shit needs to be explained a bit more. And it certainly didn't give any time to that.
They don't I mean, you're saying like it would be a shame if they hadn't already done The Dark Knight Rises, but they don't really explain why Anne Hathaway can keep up with Bane's goons.
They don't. They don't. No, that's true. They don't really explain that, do they? In terms of like where she's come from.
She can just handle herself in the same kind of way that everyone, every film just uses that as like an excuse of why Catwoman can fend for herself, just because the line, "I can take care of myself."
Yeah,
and
that's just it. Yeah,
that's fine. True, that'll do.
I suppose in a way, because she had more of a mysterious origin story, that made more sense in The Dark Knight Rises because she came from nowhere. But this Catwoman, you kind of know where she grew up. She grew up in the clubs, and all this kind of stuff. So I guess she's tough. She's been like surrounded by gangsters her whole life. But
mob orphan.
Mob orphan, yeah. It's just cool. But it's like, so if you are, then when did you go to, what's Ra's al Ghul's place called in the mountains?
Oh, the League of Shadows.
The League of Shadows.
When did you go to the League of Shadows and learn how to fight? Yeah, that whole thing. So there was no mention of that in this movie, was there? I didn't think of that until just now, but there was none of that.
I guess I found on an emotional level, it's hard to say rang true in settings like this, aren't they, which are so fantastical, even in the relatively grounded world of Batman in terms of superhero stuff. I thought emotionally it was great, though, because I was really pleased with Anne Hathaway in The Dark Knight Rises, but I was pleased by her ability to, and I think she's great in that, but I think she's great in the way that I was like, oh, she can do a camp, fun Batman villain really well.
Yeah.
Whereas this I thought was a bit more real, and it was a bit more tender, and it was kind of... I really like the way that she's actually, and again, compared to Bruce Wayne, she's a relatively sorted person.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, like, the dynamic, relatively, obviously she's traumatized and hurt and everything and looking for vengeance and angry, but she, compared to him, she looks like a well-adjusted citizen, and I really like that, because that's like the opposite of the dynamic in Batman Returns, isn't it? Where he's relatively well-adjusted compared to her.
Well, that becomes the theme of the movie, doesn't it? It's like, you think you have shit to complain about. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's that her in the same way. It's like she's kind of got her shit together better than Bruce, but she's had arguably a way more fucked up existence on the whole than he has. He's witnessed his family getting killed, which fucking sucks. By the way, what was that? I didn't quite get that plot about Martha Wayne. Can we talk about that? Like, what was it that she was meant to be...
let's move on to that second.
What was that about? Was she meant to be mentally ill or something and then covered up?
So I actually found it useful because I saw it with a couple of friends yesterday, including my mate Drew, who's been on the podcast, and we had dinner afterwards, and he helped me talk through some of the things that I'd either missed or kind of overlooked or overcomplicated in my own head. I just wanted to, before we moved on from Selina, I just wanted to note that her relationship with John Turturro as Falcone was interesting, wasn't it? Because of it is quite a complicated plot, and little bits come out in pieces, and you find out that she's his illegitimate daughter. But then it's actually creepier than when the whole piece comes together at the end. It's creepier, isn't it? Because he doesn't really know that. Like, he doesn't know that the adult her is his daughter.
Yeah.
So when he's creeping on her in the club earlier, you kind of think, when you find out she's his daughter, you're like, oh, he wasn't creeping. He was tenderly holding her or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, no, he was creeping.
No, he was creeping. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that because he didn't know. I kind of for a minute thought he knew the whole time, but he didn't. Yeah.
So it's sort of Oedipal in a way, is it? Like, it's sort of, I mean, that's misusing the term slightly, but it's getting into that weird incestuous family dynamic, at least on his part,
Yeah.
But yeah, you talk about so let's talk about the Waynes, right? Because I noted before that we hadn't talked about Joker, the movie that came out in 2019, very much in relation to this. The big piece of DNA in this that I think this film's... I know The Batman's been in production for years now. It was originally going to involve Ben Affleck, and this Matt Reeves took over, and it's been remodeled to an extent, and the pandemic's happened and everything like that. But I'm sure a lot of the building blocks of this film were in place, if not all of them, by the time Joker came out. However, there are interesting parallels here, and I think that's particularly in the way they treat the Waynes as flawed figures that are to be re-examined, right? Because that's a bit different from the Nolan trilogy, isn't it? Like, for all its grittiness and quote-unquote adultness, they basically treat the Waynes as saints, really.
Yeah, they do.
Like, they might as well be Aunt May and Uncle Ben, really, for all the complication that's put into them.
They're martyrs, aren't they, really?
Yeah, and the people, particularly even in Nolan's Gotham, the sort of they're people who did civic good and did the city good.
Yeah.
And in Joker, I mean, I'd say it's still ambiguous, but less ambiguously than in this one. Thomas Wayne's just kind of a bit of an arsehole, right? And kind of like someone who's out of touch politically here, someone who's hurt people through his personal and his political and his financial actions. And obviously there's a whole other lot to get into with Joker that we don't have time for here. But in this, I thought they gave themselves a bit more of an out, and you could say that makes this a slightly more mainstream film. But I think it's interesting that when Bruce in this finds out from Falcone that his dad was a flawed figure who basically had someone killed, right? Like an innocent journalist killed because of embarrassing family secrets. Bruce goes to Alfred, who's already in the hospital as a result of one of the Riddler's bombs, and Alfred gives him the version of that. And I think it's quite nicely ambiguous that Alfred is giving him the version that Alfred was always going to have to give him. But in a way, it's kind of because whatever the facts of the matter, Alfred's kind of as deluded as he is. Like, Alfred kind of needs this as well, right? Like, Alfred gave his life to serving and protecting the Waynes and failed. And he'd be giving up as much as Bruce in a weird way by admitting that Thomas Wayne was a flawed figure.
Yes, he's saying that it could possibly not be the truth, essentially. Like,
He's sort of saying the truth's complicated in a way, isn't he? Which isn't quite the same as saying it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce asks him questions and he responds with, I don't know.
I wish I knew for sure, doesn't he say?
Yeah, I don't think he had him killed, but I don't want to think that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I completely agree. Recontextualizing them in this kind of way, I feel like definitely made them feel like more just make them feel like definite characters that I've never really had before. They've always just been like Bruce's backstory and his context for why he is like he is, but he's never really had to kind of approach this idea of them having mob ties. And
no,
I haven't even thought about Thomas being a doctor and being able to like save Falcone's life. That was such a thing. Like, oh yeah, of course he would, because he's a doctor, and that's something I've never thought. I just thought about him being his dead dad and not actually having a life beforehand.
I just got flashes of the medical bag from Batman Begins and stuff in playing with the stethoscope.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was certainly for me one of the best parts of the Joker movie, was the fact that they went there and they did that with Thomas Wayne. I thought that was truly original. So for this movie again to grab that, do something with it, but then kind of backtrack on it, was not a strong part for me. I mean, I know what you're saying, David. Like, I wish they'd made it more ambiguous, where it's kind of like, if you want to believe that, or the kind of thing that good people do make mistakes, that would have been I think a little bit more brave if they had done that. But they did kind of wrap it up a bit nicely.
But I think Thomas Wayne did make a mistake, however you boil that, right? And I think he, by his own values, he did, and quite a terrible one, really. Like a morally souring one. And I think it's we've already got Joker in I suppose in a sense, this didn't have to do that. And I think when I was thinking about the movie afterwards, I was like, I like this went as far as it did, and I think it's an interesting, different take than Joker, and I don't think it's quite as full of back out as maybe I did when I was watching it in the moment, because I was disappointed that Alfred didn't die, for example, in the moment.
Same.
And then I was like, this is because it dilutes it slightly, right? And because I thought that was the Maggie Gyllenhaal in Dark Knight moment, right? Almost directly, right?
Or the Coulson in Avengers. It was going to be his impetus to try and fine, I'll avenge you. I'll try and take this more seriously. But I couldn't help but feel like this had to do that with Thomas Wayne. I'm not trying to bring it into the socio-political landscape, but I can't help but feel like any film that's trying to make a billionaire into a good guy isn't going to do a good job unless they're Tony Stark, where he's losing the arms dealing and being more of a philanthropist and trying to change the world for the better. If you're trying to make Thomas Wayne into someone more, I don't know, scummy, I feel like that's going to be a bit more believable, and you're going to have the audience on your side in the same way that, I don't know, we are the 99%, and which is what Joker kind of taps into, and I feel like that kind of making him into the elite is going to be a way of making Bruce potentially look at his own self and the way that he hasn't been helping out. And I think even the congresswoman says, you could be really helping, but you're not. You're choosing not to. And then the guy who he stands next to at the funeral is like, these rich elites, and it touches on it slightly, but not enough that I would have wanted to. By the end of it, having the Riddler's followers being these incels who just want to try and take down the elites and stuff.
Yeah. We barely have time to touch on like the sort of the internet culture that seems to fuel sort of the Riddler's cult in a sense. But you could look at The Dark Knight Rises in isolation, the Joker movie, and this as almost like a trilogy of Batman movies that accidentally try and make complicated the idea of are billionaires good, right? Like all sorts of coming out since Occupy Wall Street, and some of them go a bit deeper than others, I think, in various ways. But one thing I really liked about this actually is, and I think maybe the nearest it comes to criticism where I am a bit disappointed that they backed off. And I think, Mike, you said something similar about you wish they'd hammered this home a bit more, was what's it called, the renewal fund, this kind of like thing set up by Thomas Wayne. I thought the pretty clear implication of the plot and of what the Riddler reveals and all that sort of stuff is that this has been used to fuel and fund political corruption throughout Gotham that is materially worse than the city over decades. And a big part of that problem is that Bruce has taken his eye off the ball. That Bruce has been selfish. That Bruce actually does, and actually this is quite a traditional, this is quite a conservative message. Bruce is an aristocrat and he has responsibilities. And he's not been and so that is actually ultimately quite a conservative message. You need the aristocrat to be a good aristocrat, otherwise the town will go to rack and ruin. And he's not been doing that. He's been indulging himself, in this destructive quest, and he's basically not been looking after his money, right? I mean, it almost boils down to that.
Yeah, and that's what the overarching message at the end of the movie is, that vengeance is essentially useless. Because it's like he says, I need to become something more. I need to become hope. Because like individual taking over revenge on individual characters is not actually going to solve the problems. It's like I need to become the symbol that people like need to to follow me into the light, sort of thing. So yeah, that does feel like. I mean, I thought that was actually a really great moment when the Riddler's goon turns around and he says like, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Vengeance." And I thought that was a nice moment there.
Mm. And he's one of the dispossessed who talks to him at the church before, isn't he? He is that guy, who's part of the underclass. So again, you've got that sort of problematizing of revolutionary ideas, when they're putting them out of the underclass in films like this. But I was talking about it as a conservative fantasy, which to an extent, vigilante movies are. We've talked about this many times, haven't we? Obviously it's sort of base level Alan Moore analysis to just be like, these are basically fascist parables on quite a lot of levels. However, I think this film goes quite far in what you might call a loosely progressive direction as well, in kind of emphasising that ultimately heroism is about having responsibilities and looking after people, right? Because they really. I was going to ask you guys what you thought of the ending in general, and there's a couple of kind of ending aspects, and we will talk about some of the more fun ones as well. But like the whole scene as an action climax at Gotham Plaza, obviously involving the flooding of it, and that's a big action set piece where Batman takes down the Riddler's goons with Riddler already.
Basically turned into a disaster movie, didn't it, essentially?
Yeah.
Kind of did. And one actually that Drew pointed out last night is really redolent of climate change as well, the literal flooding of Gotham, which I didn't even pick up in the moment. What did you think of the whole kind of it? I thought it was almost like religious imagery when Batman sort of, first he falls in the water and is sort of reborn, and then he sort of goes over to the rubble-strewn Gothamites and like leads them out with the flare gun, right? Leads them kind of into the promised land. And I was like, this is going pretty deep in terms of the imagery it's reaching for and stuff. And I think in a less irritating way than Zack Snyder again sometimes did that stuff.
Well, my first reaction to that was that I didn't quite, on first viewing, I get it now, I've had time to think about it, but on first viewing I didn't really make the connection that the people of Gotham were still afraid of the Batman. So them all sort of hunching in the corner away from him. I thought, why is that happening? That was a little bit confusing to me. So it wasn't an immediate hit of like, oh, that's awesome. Knowing now and having time to think about it, and the fact that they were still essentially just afraid of the Batman, just thinking he was like possibly, they didn't know what his intentions were. Now I think that's a really awesome sequence actually, and that's one of the sequences I'm looking forward to watching again, with the context and the fact that he saves them from the electrical mains falling into the water and stuff. This movie just gets better actually. The more I think about it and the more we talk about it, it's really going up in my estimation. I think that it certainly is the sort of Radiohead album syndrome for me.
There's definitely a lot going on.
I just think you're right in terms of the fact that the start of the film is Bruce saying that how much he loves the city and how the scum are afraid of Batman because of the spotlight that's going into the sky. But and like it's more focused on punishing the evildoers. And then by the end of the film, Bruce has realized that he has to actually step out of the shadows and be more of a guiding light, like literally like leading them through that water. And because like it's never really mentioned how like normal people of Gotham like don't really know him that well, and he's still being introducing himself to the police, and like by the end of it, yeah, you're right. The politician has no idea who the hell this guy is. He was dressed like a bat, lifting up the girder, and he's able to actually be a bit of more of a guiding light for the people. He's on the roof. He's helping people get on to the stretchers, and like yeah, he's become more of a helper of the needy rather than a person who just beats up kids on trains. So yeah,
he's learned that the fear and the detachment were damaging him in the city. I suppose it's like, as someone pointed out on Twitter that I saw that, you know, that just for a really basic thing, this Batman doesn't take refuge on the outskirts of the town in a old spooky manor house. He's in a tower, like he's above the people. You know, he's detached in a very modern billionaire penthouse type way, right? You know, and it's kind of, he has to learn to like literally descend, I suppose you might say. You know, like it.
Yeah. And just on that point, I always got surprised every time they went inside Wayne Manor, and it looked straight out of Tim Burton.
Yeah,
like it was gothic architecture to fuck. It was mental.
That was the moment where you actually nudged me and went, "Did Tim Burton have anything to do with this
what
movie?"
Is this? Yeah, where are they in this? Yeah, they just stumbled into a Tim Burton film. Yeah, it was crazy.
I love the architecture. It really reminded me. Have you ever been inside Manchester Town Hall?
Yes.
And like buildings like that. It was actually pretty similar with all those kind of like crossing stairways and the sort of brown, sort of stonework and stuff like that. But I loved that actually, and I love the fact that I couldn't help thinking of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. You know, when he went under the ground and he was the Batcave was in an abandoned railway station.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. Yeah,
I think the Ninja Turtles occurred to me as well at that point. Actually,
oh good, it's not just me. Yeah, when you saw the empty train car, I was like, yeah.
I've just realised we've got quite a few things to cover in relatively limited time. I just wanted to ask you quickly, did you have any sort of standout scenes, I suppose, like either just visually or thematically? Because I've got one to hand. I mean, it's an obvious one, and I'm sure a lot of people point out, but I did really love the church memorial for the late mayor. You know, especially the bit where Bruce obviously turns around and the Riddler is up in the gallery.
That was really well done.
Just before the car comes in through. That was just genuine. There were a few appearances of the Riddler that were genuinely spooky, weren't they? And that was he is like a ghost, and that's a, like Batman, that's a non-supernatural villain who's almost taking on supernatural qualities, but in a just about believable way, right? You know?
Yeah.
Well, like in the way that it could have been anyone as well, you know, who was talking to the bloke in the audience who was disgruntled about something and everything. So that was a real, the suspense in that scene was brilliant.
Just quickly, that's another parallel, isn't it? Where, like, you know, because Bruce Wayne is this dangerous, maybe not killer, but this dangerous thug who's walking around in plain clothes.
Yeah.
You know, maybe people should be scared of that guy.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, there's similarities there. Yeah, that's a good juxtaposition. Yeah. But the bit that like really got me was just the initial appearance as Batman, because you know, again, you felt every punch and every hit. You really felt that. Again, the thugs were in danger, but Bruce was in danger as well. You know, it would only take you know, someone with a more powerful gun or a sharper knife to maybe get the better of him. But the appearance, the steps out of the darkness and all that, and then the scenes later on that were the illuminated by gunfire. You know, where you see the bullets ricocheting off his armor, and that's the only light source that there is in the room. Yeah. That was so cool as well. So aesthetically, can't fault it at all.
One of my favourite little touches in The Dark Knight Rises is just before, obviously everyone loves the Bane fight scene where his back gets broken, but I love that too. But like when him and Selina in The Dark Knight Rises are approaching Bane's sort of trap, and they're starting to do Batman fights, and you're almost a bit sick of Batman fights at this stage. They've just done it, but it starts to go into that almost stop motion sort of strobe kind of style, and that's another bit in those movies where Batman actually looks properly alien and scary again. And I thought this did that in almost every fight scene. It did really like.
Yeah, it played on that definitely. Yeah, it took those moments from the tunnels, Bane's like, you know, the tunnels under the ground. And is it like where Christian Bale is like coming towards the camera and he's like jumping off the walls and you just get in these individual frames and then all of a sudden he's upon the camera and like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I thought of those scenes as well.
Again, Batman is always at least one of the scariest people in those fight scenes, isn't he? Which is how it should be, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Mike, I mean, did you have a standout kind of moment or a moment that hit you more than you thought it would? Or?
You made a good point about how the the memorial scene was really damn good because I thought that it was really impressive how like barely any audio or dialogue was being said, and it was all like the screams of outside the church and like Bruce looking around paying attention to what was happening. Him seeing Riddler, like you say, just staring up in silhouette above him was brilliant, and then just like hearing it coming and hearing it crashing and then him saving the boy was all done remarkably well. I thought that was brilliantly done. But I also liked, in the same style, when you first see him in the mayor's house, like
oh, that was superb.
Yeah, and that was very Zodiac feels. When he just like moves to the side and you see him standing there breathing heavily, just all in the shadows waiting for him, and that's again very similar to how Batman is, like just in the shadows, just like doing the same kind of thing.
I love the basic storytelling of like when you have him looking through the binoculars and then the binoculars go up to the skylight. And then your brain puts that together, and it's like he's going to use that skylight to get into the house. It was just such simple kind of storytelling, but it worked so effectively. And that was out of the best horror film. You know, those scenes, you know, wouldn't have been out of place in Don't Breathe or Hush or any movie like that.
Hush is a very opposite thing to mention in it.
Hush is definitely. I also really liked. It was only a small bit, but when Batman is using the robotic contact lenses to really like get the information that he needs from the corrupt district attorney. But then I really like the dynamic between him and Catwoman when Catwoman like leaves and follows her own kind of vengeance thing, and then like Batman's getting really angry with her and saying like, no, stay, I need to be part of this, and she just doesn't listen, and she goes off on one to try and find out. I really just liked that, how it didn't really go to Batman's plan, and like he was really frustrated by it not happening, and that was just another sign of him still not having control of the situation because he is still learning how to be a detective and still learning the clues. And I just thought that there was just it added more personality to Selina's character as well, how she wasn't going to just listen to what he said, and she was trying to find out on her own terms. And
on the contact lens vibe as well, it kind of made the previous scenes, because when the contact lens were revealed, it made you realize that in that first crime scene when he's being really stoic and just scanning the room with everything, he's working. You know, he's not doing nothing. He's literally getting footage of everything and making sure he gets it all on camera, you know. So it kind of made you think back to the previous scenes and go, he wasn't just being too cool for school. He was literally like, working on that.
And it's mirroring the binoculars before, isn't it, by both the Riddler and Batman, and it's coming back to the idea that people are other people's tools, and everyone's trying to take advantage of everyone else, and everyone's trying to use each other as conduits for their own desires and vengeance. And again, that frustration of Batman, it's another weakness in a sense, another fallibility sort of touch. I just wanted to quickly, because we've come across something like we're almost gushing about this movie now, and we'll see where you land sort of overall shortly. But like, just in terms of like relatively minor gripes that didn't work maybe so well, you might have a couple to add in yourselves that we haven't talked about already. I'm not quite sure if the Nirvana worked for me.
I was going to say the same thing.
I'm really not being an arsehole about it. It was a fine choice. It was a fine choice to make.
I didn't need it twice.
I don't think it quite worked for me.
Did not need it twice.
That was another problem. Yeah, that was another. I think one time I would have been like, this is a unique decision. I'm not sure I can fully mesh with it. But I was like, all right, come on.
The only thing I didn't mind about it was when it turned into diegetic music, and it just turned out that Bruce was just listening to it in the Batcave, being his like little mopey self.
That fits.
I kind of felt like, okay, that does fit his character to be listening to Something in the Way by Nirvana. But also, do you know what the plot or like why Kurt Cobain wrote Something in the Way?
No.
Wasn't it sort of about his at least sort of self-mythologized dropout past and stuff, and hanging out under bridges and that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had like run away from home, and it's like a memory of him being underneath a bridge and like having nothing to do, but like having like pet like worms and like animals around him as his friends, and it just kind of. I kind of could see why it was being used in that situation, being like Bruce is on his own and like the bats being his friends, and like just I just kind of could see the similarities, and I feel like it's an interesting choice. But I always feel like the same thing of like having Che Guevara on shirts. I'm pretty sure Kurt Cobain wouldn't want his music being used in like a big Warner Brothers film like this, but so it didn't sit well with me. But I kind of could see why it was being used.
maybe in the universe the Penguin gave him that CD. You know, it's okay to eat fish, kid, because they don't have any feelings.
Yes, exactly.
No, that was an odd one. I mean, did you? I tell you what, just before we sort of sum up, I do have to ask you about one more thing, and it's kind of it's more of a fun thing, really. But I suppose it's an interesting cap on the franchise as a whole and possible future directions of it. So there is that scene in Arkham, right? Yeah. I hadn't even really thought if we were going to get anything like that, which is weird because we've talked before about it sort of remixing and in some senses reusing things that the series has done before. I mean, that is straightforwardly a version of the Joker card from the end of Batman Begins, isn't it? It's a more direct version of that, an unexpectedly direct version of that. Did you guys look up who that actor was? Because this is the spoiler zone, so we can say it.
Barry Keoghan.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that casting. I'm surprised that it's gone for him since he was just in the Eternals, but I feel like that is interesting, but I hope that they don't go through with it.
Right.
I feel
what
like...
you mean with his casting, ultimately, or do you mean with...
I don't want them to do another Joker. I want someone else. I want someone fresh. I don't want someone to go... I mean, like, not that the bar hasn't been lowered by Jared Leto, but I just want them to potentially do... I think it's a nice little cameo. I'm fine with it happening, but... I was like very surprised that they allowed the inmates to talk to each other for one. And I was just why?
Arkham always does a few things that don't make sense.
Why are you allowing these supervillains to just come up with a plot together and become friends? That was interesting.
Yeah.
Also, if there's one cell, let's not put the Riddler in. It's that one next to the Joker. Let's maybe
probably
exactly two very very similar personalities. But it was just the fact that I was so happy with it just being a standalone. I didn't feel like it needed a franchise. I was just like, no, please, just to have it be like this. You've already got your plans with apparently the Flash movie retconning everything anyway. So if you're not going to make this part of the Joker universe by having a different Joker, this is going to be like our sixth different Joker. And it's just like, enough with the Joker. Just please something new. You're wanting this to be interesting.
And again, with the Riddler, you've deliberately gone for something you haven't done since 1995 and are doing it in a very different way. Whereas now you're going straight back to something that, again, is arguably overused and over-traveled recently. And
I couldn't help get the feeling of... do you remember the after-credit scene in The Amazing Spider-Man?
No.
So,
what was that?
Reese Ifans' Lizard is put into prison, I think, or maybe some kind of asylum.
Zoo.
But then, some yeah, exactly. So, some random person who's in the shadows with a hat says, "Did you tell him about his father?" And then lightning happens and he disappears. And it was just like, that went nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And it's just sequel bait for sequel bait's sake. And I just didn't like it.
This is when they were trying to cure up all that Sinister Six stuff, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. I remember that. But I know so little about the Spider-Man mythos that I was just like, even more so. I was just like,
that's fair. But I was just like, oh god, they're doing the exact same thing of just like, oh, let's meet up with a friend in Arkham Asylum and let's make try and hint. And I'm just like, you did enough. Just leave it.
It's like with scenes like that, you're like, what does this scene add to the movie apart from fan service? That's it was cool.
Exactly,
it was like my least favorite scenes in this movie. Aesthetically brilliant, really well done. I love the reveal of the scarification that you saw for just a moment, like through the thing. You blinked and you missed it, but it was really deep. You could see his whole jawline of was just pulled back.
He seemed almost shark-like, didn't he?
Or like Melina from Mortal Kombat or something.
But what does this scene add to the picture? Nothing. Really, it shows what Arkham's like, but we're not. The movie's over. So I like the worst moments in this movie. It didn't take it anywhere. It didn't level up the film for me, apart from being a cool bit of fan service.
I enjoyed it, but I'm a sucker for this, so it's like it's like saying I'm a fanboy, so it worked, But like it's kind of. But I mean, it'd be interesting, was it? Because as I say, we're only reviewing this 4 days into the film's release. It appears to be doing very well at the box office, so like it may become one of these like $1 billion+ movies, which post pandemic is particularly interesting. Well, not post pandemic, but as anything happening after the pandemic became an issue, this is interesting. But I mean, it almost leaves you the question: can you just throw in a Joker thing as a nice Easter egg anymore, or does that have to become the whole future direction of the franchise? I guess we'll see.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's do it. So I'm not going to ask you for a numerical rating because I think that's a bit basic. But we talked before about our sort of favorite Batman movies and stuff. I mean, I presume it's not displaced either of your actual full-on favourites, because, I mean, how could it do that overnight, you know? But, no. If at all. But, I mean, do you think this does enough to have, like, a sort of worthwhile place in the Batman canon, I suppose?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm totally...
I'd say it was worthwhile doing this more than, say, Ben Affleck having another, when he's just going to just go on his own way. I liked it being unique enough from like a year 2 Batman. I feel like that's an interesting viewpoint to come from it. I feel like Pattinson was a really good Batman, and yeah, I still feel like it was worth my time watching. But it's not displacing anything of the Nolan trilogy, which is still my favorite.
Yeah, I suppose as I sort of said at the beginning of this discussion, like, I got a lot more out of it than I thought I would, and it's too soon to say whether I'm sort of fond of it and how influential it'll be in my thinking and everything when it comes to future installments. But I enjoyed most of the things in it, and I thought and some of them I enjoyed significantly more than I thought I would. And as I say, and I sort of, it wasn't even, as I said, I went in, I was excited about Paul Dano. I did enjoy Paul Dano as well. That paid off for me. Yeah. It paid off in slightly different ways, and I found his performance fascinating, and probably not all in completely good directions, but that's almost kind of with Paul Dano, you kind of want that, you almost want to like roll a couple of crazy dice throws with Paul Dano and just go to see what he's minded to do in any given moment, but well, you know, I think we covered most of the stuff there that at least I wanted to. I mean, thanks for talking about that with me, gentlemen, and it was really nice to talk to you guys about it.
Thank you for inviting us on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
No, thank you for...
Yeah, glad to do it.
Thank you for doing the crossover episode. You know, I mean, there's nothing more comic booky than a crossover.
Are we going to call it Pulling Goats or Escaping Focus? Or I don't know. What can we call it?
Pulling Goats.
I think Escaping Focus is going to have less troublesome and problematic search results, I think.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Totally.
The implication of the other is not good.
Yeah. You know, I like Escaping Focus. That's in many ways my sort of life goal.
So that's all from David, Matt, and myself. So thank you very much for joining us. David, would you like to plug your pluggables, such as the Escape Code podcast?
The stuff I've sort of, it's changed the way that I sort of put these out in terms of series structures and things like that. But I'm basically on what's my 3rd series at the moment, and we've recently done one on the long-running comedy show Curb Your Enthusiasm, which featured my good friend Chris Doughty, who came on from the Wasting Time podcast to talk about that. That was really good fun, and just put out one, specifically the one before this when it comes out. Episode 45 was about the Johnny Maxwell series of young adult books by Terry Pratchett, which featured the wonderful George Daniel Lee and James S. Murphy.
That was one of your best episodes yet, David. I thought that was fantastic. Oh, that's really good.
Nice to hear. I suppose it helps because you admire the books as well.
Yeah, I like the subject matter, but no, it was a superb episode, and you're getting the great guests on there. You're building a really good show, dude.
Oh, ditto, you know. It's been really great to listen to.
I've got to say that your Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes were pretty good. Yeah.
You know, me and Chris resisted doing that on the episode, so the fact that you guys have caved into it is
couldn't
really
resist.
admirable.
Couldn't resist.
Yeah, really something.
Amazing. So if you'd like to hear more from us, subscribe to our channel and be sure to like this video, as it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Twitch now by searching for the name Matt and Mike Paul Focus. Say goodbye, Matt.
Bye, Matt.
Say goodbye, David.
Yeah, goodbye.
And that's goodbye from me. Goodbye.
It's not as easy as it looks, is it?